Dealing with negative emotions is a constant struggle for all of us, and the internal war we wage against them can feel nothing short of endless. But while there are definitely times where it may seem unfair or out of our control, there are still plenty of holes that we dig ourselves into without even realizing it. Whether we are taking our conclusions to the extreme, being quick to blame others, or exaggerating the impact that a negative event has had on our life, we are all guilty of buying into the stories we tell ourselves. And so today, I want to talk about the idea of calling out those thoughts and figure out how we can escape the negative spirals we've been pulled into. Now, while I've had a lot of experience with this particular type of negative thinking, I had never realized up until recently that these types of thoughts actually have a name. A few weeks ago, I stumbled upon an incredibly insightful video released by a psychologist named Nick Wignall, and the name he uses to describe these types of negative thoughts are what are known as cognitive distortions. And they are essentially concepts and ideas that our mind fabricates as a response to negative events that occur in our life. This can include stuff like having a black and white mindset towards something, or hastily making decisions based on emotion rather than logic, or even blaming yourself for something that wasn't in your control. And these are just a few examples of many. And the more I sat with this term and the different categories that come with it, the more I realized how prevalent these thoughts are, not just in my own life, but also in the gaming community at large. So what I want to do is take you guys down a spiral of negativity for a few minutes, and I'm going to use World of Warcraft players to help illustrate these distortions, because, oh boy, are we all guilty to some extent. I think a lot of the negativity surrounding WoW right now can be attributed to these cognitive distortions running rampant throughout the game, and I think you'll quickly start to notice how these thoughts affect every other aspect of our lives as well. We're going to start with the act of mind reading, or in other words, the act of planting assumptions into another person based on a perceivably negative action that you took. God only knows how much tanks and healers deal with this right now. You make one mistake in any given run or raid boss that ruins someone's parse, or that breaks a Mythic Plus key, or even just the thought of a corpse run simply costing time out of someone's day. And then, all of a sudden, even if we don't receive any actual negative feedback from anyone, we subscribe to the downward spiral anyway. We generate thoughts such as, damn, these guys probably think I'm useless. Or, I bet the raid leader will kick me out of the group if I mess up again. Or, I bet that hunter just put me on their ignore list so they know to never invite me to another group in the future. And these thoughts just keep pouring in until you're inevitably burnt out. Even more unfortunately, this path that you've unknowingly forced yourself to tread can also lead to other cognitive distortions that just get added onto the pile. Personalization is another one that can creep into the mix, which is when we take responsibility for something that we couldn't control, like when a DPS just stands in fire and dies. And yet, we still immediately assume that that player thinks poorly of us if we're the ones that are healing, even when they don't say anything about it. Or how about when an overly geared character blasts a pack of enemies so hard and so sudden that the tank can't possibly do his job? If you're that tank, you might get inundated with thoughts of, this is my fault, because I didn't move fast enough or think far enough ahead, even though you're the one that's supposed to be setting the pace for the dungeon, not your DPS. And from there, some of us dig down even further, where distortions such as blaming and labeling rear their ugly skulls. That same tank might lash out at that player in party chat instead, desperately trying to redirect the negative energy towards the supposed offender, while ironically bringing themselves down in the process. Meanwhile, one of the other damage dealers in the group isn't performing as well as the others, and they end up sabotaging their own mental fortitude by blaming their placement on the damage meters on bad frame rate or lag from the servers. They start attaching negative labels to Blizzard and their engineers for not ensuring that the gameplay is smooth 110% of the time. And speaking of generating and directing our negativity at Blizzard, we've got an all-you-can-eat buffet of corrupted thinking to completely spoil our day. We tend to overgeneralize sometimes when they extend maintenance for the launch of a big new patch or a brand new version of the game, implanting this idea in our head that they suck, and clearly they don't know what they're doing over there. Even when those launches are successful, a huge portion of the community just can't help but discount the positive aspects that came out of taking that extra time to make sure that we didn't have a negative experience. And please don't misunderstand, I have zero interest in being Blizzard's white knight, and I, like many others, have plenty of issues with the company and the decisions they've made over the years. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, it certainly doesn't help to dwell on those things, and whether we realize it or not, it is in our control to just let stuff like that go. Don't let this kind of crap ruin your day, or even your week. It's not worth it. However, there is one last cognitive distortion that I need to address before I can finally shift away from this spiral of negativity that I've dragged you into. And it's the scariest of them all. Because if enough of these distortions accumulate all at once and you don't catch it in time, you can go from slowly drifting down the spiral to falling right through it. And this is known as catastrophizing. When you catastrophize, you are taking your exaggerations of negative events that haven't even occurred yet to the extreme. This one is running rampant right now in the WoW community, with some of the highlights including all the drama surrounding OnlyFans and the brutal criticisms directed at the current state of Mythic Plus. And even though those criticisms may be valid, it's just really unfortunate how hard it is to find positivity online right now in general. Sometimes all it takes for any given player is to have a really bad day, come home to hopefully mitigate some of their stress, only to pull up one of these videos about Mythic Plus that sends them into a panic. Well, if this person says Mythic Plus is in big trouble, then maybe I need to stop running dungeons completely. What about my friends? Are they still going to play? What if the guild disbands? If everyone else quits Mythic Plus, then I can't even pug for groups. And if one of World of Warcraft's biggest pillars is truly dying, then that means the game must be dying too, right? Maybe I should just quit WoW. But I can't quit because I've invested thousands of hours into this game. What do? It's been 4 hours already and we haven't gotten a blue post yet? Don't they see the outrage? Don't they care? This is just a mild example of what catastrophizing can look like. And I say mild because at the end of the day, as painful as an experience like this can feel, it doesn't compare to the havoc this can wreak in the real world. Let me give you a personal example. So I've been working for the same company for the past 9 years now. It is also the first job I've ever gotten in the corporate world, and for the most part, it's been pretty great. But of course, every job has its ups and downs, and easily the darkest time I've ever experienced with the company came in year 3, when our biggest client, who was essentially responsible for about half of our total revenue, went out of business. As a result, about 25% of our staff were laid off, and the other 75% were given significant pay cuts until the decision makers could figure out a way to save the company. Our future was grim to say the least, and a large part of my worry at the time came from 2 things. One of them was the fact that we were heavily reliant on existing clients, and our current systems were over 20 years old, had huge security holes in them, which was something that was becoming more and more important around that time, and had zero scalability, making it hard to bring in new business. And the second thing that came to my mind was what I was actually bringing to the table and how I fit into the company's structure. Now, at the time, my position with the company was the lowest level of help desk support that you can possibly imagine, and I was considered purely an overhead expense. But the real problem was that my support knowledge was confined to those ancient 20-year-old systems that were built from scratch with custom code by in-house developers back in the 90s. In that moment, I realized that I essentially spent the first 2.5 years developing a skill set that wouldn't work anywhere else. And this is when I lost control. I'm not making the company any money, and there's already 4 of us in the IT department. There's no way they're keeping me. I'm going to have to get another job. But how? Nothing I've learned up until this point is useful anywhere else. It's been 3 years since I finished school. I don't remember anything they taught me. I'm going to have to go back or take an online course, but I can't even do that because I've been living paycheck to paycheck already. I can't afford it. What is my girlfriend going to think when I get home? We just had an argument the other day. What happens when I go home and tell her that I've lost my job and I don't even have an updated resume and I have no immediate plans to get back on track? She's going to break up with me. I'm going to be forced to live with my parents again and start my adult life from scratch. This was what was going through my mind at the time, and just to be completely transparent, I didn't really do much about it. I had already given up. I had already accepted that I was going to lose everything. But fate had other plans, and by fate, I mean luck, because over the course of the next 6 months, somehow, someway, the clouds gave way to a new opportunity. Because as a result of the pay cuts, members of my department left the company to make more elsewhere, and I was told that I would have to play the system administrator role temporarily while they found a replacement. So I took a few deep breaths, cut myself some slack, put the vicious criticisms of myself to the side, and went all in. And not only did I continue to manage those older systems until they inevitably shut down, I was also fully responsible for their replacements. The CRM, the ERP, the warehouse management systems, the B2B fulfillment sites, everything. I would go on to become a member of our operations team, designing new processes and workflows to make others more efficient. Sometimes I'm a project manager, especially when the task at hand covers multiple departments at once. And I've even dipped my toes into basic web development, setting up microsites and crafting HTML for email. I went from near catastrophe to career salvation. And I'm going to try not to be too hard on myself, but I have to reiterate how lucky I truly was for that opportunity to essentially be handed to me. There are many others out there that have been in the exact same position as me and never got that second chance. Some of them catastrophized themselves into despair, and I'm sure most of them never fully recover from it. So let me finally put an end to this path of darkness that I've taken you down so far, and bring the conversation back into the light. There are a few things that have helped me break the cycles that I've fallen into, and those include catching and recognizing patterns in my negative thinking, taking initiative on those thoughts, and then finally shifting my focus onto something else. I think it's really useful to practice picking up on when your negative thoughts are triggered and what they look like. This is really hard to do at first, because the truth is, many of us just aren't accustomed to it, but I have noticed that it does get easier over time. What I've been trying to do lately is jot down a sentence or two that describe my negative experiences when I'm able to catch them. Something like, I'm feeling anxious because I accidentally pulled an extra trash pack, or I'm feeling angry because the mage in my group keeps pulling ahead of the tank, or I'm feeling frustrated tonight because I had time to write but didn't like anything that I actually typed out. And the main idea here is, after a few weeks of doing this, you'll probably end up with a pretty hefty list of negative moments to look back on. Just make sure you're not ruminating on each event on your list, and instead try to recognize a pattern, because chances are there are specific cognitive distortions that you sign up for more than others. And if you're able to pick up on what affects you the most, that's when you can take the initiative, call them out, and acknowledge them. Because doing nothing or trying to ignore the pain is not going to help, but taking some ownership over your situation can put you back on the right path. It's really important to cut yourself some slack when you reflect on your negative moments. I find that a little self-criticism is fine in order to help shift my mindset to something more consistently positive, but I know if I beat myself up too much, then I'm basically just jumping down a different kind of negative spiral. So what I try to do is think to myself, what am I getting out of these thoughts? What function are they serving? Because the honest answer I find to those questions is almost always absolutely nothing. And at the very moment I've acknowledged the presence of these distortions, I can then look towards shifting my focus over to something else. Something to distract me from the negativity. This step is super subjective for everyone, but for me personally, doing something physical really helps get myself out of a bad mood. I really enjoy going for walks around the neighborhood with my son and paying attention to the finer details around me. Sometimes it's something as silly and as simple as noticing how the leaves fall off the trees, while other times I choose to focus on how my son is interacting with his surroundings. There's just something incredibly heartwarming about his fascination with a pine cone that he found underneath a tree, or how much fun he has throwing rocks into a sewer drain to see how big of a splash he can make. Doing some chores around the house is also a great way to feel productive while also taking your mind off things. Or even just walking away from your desk and your phone for 5 to 10 minutes to make yourself some coffee or tea. There are plenty of ways to reset ourselves when we're going through particularly rough times, but I think it's important to note that whatever activity you choose should be completely removed from whatever it is that got you into this negative space to begin with. It's really hard to put a video game down when you have a limited amount of free time, especially when you're not interested in literally anything else at that moment. But if you're that tank or healer I mentioned earlier, the chances that your emotional scale tilts back towards the positive side by simply trying to ignore or forget the bad experiences you just had are pretty slim. But if you choose to recognize those negative thoughts, acknowledge them, and then give yourself a quick distraction, there's a much better chance that you'll have a more positive experience when you get back to your desk and continue playing. And with that being said, I just want to leave you guys with one more thing, and that is to understand that having negative emotions are fine. And in fact, we kind of need them in order to grow. It's okay to be angry or sad or anxious every once in a while or even often. The key is to not let it control your life. Sit down with your feelings for a second, notice them, acknowledge them, accept them, and move on. Those thoughts may linger for a bit as you attempt to shift your focus onto something else, but again, that is okay. And in the case of World of Warcraft, sometimes we all simply need a reminder that it's just a game, something we do for fun, not for a living. So, allow me to be the reminder for you today. And let's all do our part to make the game a more positive experience for those around us. I've been a part of this community for a long time now, and I know we can do it. That's all I got for today. And as always, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.